Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are cutting through the fog around mediation and moderation. That are kinda two words that sound like they belong in a UN peacekeeping report, very actual for nowadays, but they actually live at the core of psychological research. If you have ever run a regression and thought, this can't be the whole story, well, then you were probably sniffing around a mediator or a moderator. But what are these terms? Let's unpack. So, before we get into the guts, let's see what variables we have to talk about here. You already know this. Independent variable is the thing you manipulate or observe as a cause, and dependent variables, they are the effect, or rather what you measure. But the world is kind of messier, it's never that easy as just, having two things and, life would be much easier. But no, sometimes there are variables that instead mediate the relationship. That is, they explain how or why the independent variable affects the dependent variable. Or there are variables that moderate the relationship. That is, they show when or for whom the independent variable dependent variable relationship changes. There are also suppressors, proxies, latent variables, dummy variables, participant, but let's just not panic. Just put a pin in those and worry about them when the time will come, and comment if you want a video about those. So, anyway, mediation is answering this. Why does X lead to Y? So let's say higher income predicts greater happiness. Why? Why is that the case? So one possible answer would be because people with more income go out more, attend events, have richer social lives. Thence, the IV is income, the DV is happiness, and social networking, measured via number of social outings, will be the mediator. Okay? So the mechanism here at play is that the income leads to more socializing or more opportunities for socializing, which in turn leads to more happiness. So social networking mediates the relationship between income and happiness. Okay? Now, let's don't touch on the actual statistics of this yet, and let's, look at it in Jamovi in order to have a better idea. Now, keep in mind that Jamovi is a great tool because it allows us to run mediation and moderation without the need to run hierarchical regression. Because keep in mind that theoretically, mediation and moderation are special instances of hierarchical regressions. Or, let's frame them this way, but don't worry too much. I made a video about hierarchical regression, so if you want to look more into that, feel free to check it out as well. So, Jamovi in this allows us to simply run mediation without the need to run hierarchical regression before. Pretty clutch, if you ask me. Precise? Maybe not, but again, for the purpose of understanding this exercise, it is good enough. So, imagine if this time, instead of talking about happiness, social networking, and income, we're talking about social media addiction and academic procrastination. Let's say, can social media addiction predict academic procrastination? If so, why? Maybe one hypothesis we can have here is that social media addiction actually is able to predict sleep quality, which in turn affects academic procrastination, hence perfect mediation model. So first of all, we should download from Jamovi. You can see here in models, you will go to Jamovi library. I already have them installed, but you have the mod package over here, which can be installed from the Jamovi store. You go to available, you write mod, and whatever you find, that would be it. And you just install it, simple as that. And then you will get this beautiful icon over here called medmod, which allows us to do medmod really, real easy. Yeah. So we click on medmod, and this time we want mediation, because we are trying to see if sleep quality is a significant mediator between social media addiction and academic procrastination. So simple as this, we click on mediation. All right. So first of all, let's figure out where should we put the variables. Yes, Jamovi tells you here you put the predictor, here you put the mediator, here you put the dependent variable. Yeah, fair, easy. But what if you don't know? What if you just have a hypothesis, you do not have, which is which, so we have to unpack it. So imagine that a hypothesis is simply that sleep quality will mediate the relationship between social media addiction and academic procrastination. Now, if we ran a hierarchical regression, for instance, we would know that the hypothesis behind that, the step before, would be the social media addiction predicts academic procrastination, right? So if this would be the original hypothesis, social media addiction predicts academic procrastination, then you will know that social media addiction will be the predictor, and academic procrastination will be the dependent variable, that is the outcome variable, also called this way. But one thing you know for sure, that sleep quality should be the mediator. So in case, keep in mind that always start with the easiest and then usually go with the first being the predictor, because I don't think your teachers will be that tricky that will put the predictor last using an active tense. It wouldn't make much sense really. Anyway, so first thing we did is introducing the variables in the order they should be. So we have our predictor, our mediator, our dependent. Now we just have one table, but we need one more, and we need some more detail while having this. So where do we click in Jamovi? Well, very easy. First of all, we need to have the labels, which are not necessary, but they better tell us which path, which effects are we tackling in each row. And then we click on percent mediation, which will tell us basically the percent that our mediator variable is mediating the relationship between the two other variables. And one more table we need will be the path estimates. So this is all we need for now. And as you can see, this mediation is actually not the best case scenario. So keep in mind that the ideal scenario will be this significant, which, yes, great, it is significant. It is less than 0.05 because it's 0.05, 0.005. So it is significant, which good. But the problem here is that even path C is significant. So in this case, the ideal scenario is this significant, this no significant. So we will write down ideal scenario A times B significant and C insignificant. So this is because we would like our mediated path, that is the path which is indirect, meaning A predicting B, which in turn predicts C, rather than our direct effect, because our direct effect, it is basically saying that social media addiction can predict academic procrastination regardless of sleep quality. So theoretically, there shouldn't be any need for a mediator if even when you control for the mediator, you actually have still significant. So this is not the best case scenario because this is significant and this is not. Sorry, this is significant as well. So here instead, in this table, we see the metaphorically, figuratively, the single regressions. That is, you see in path A, social media addiction predicting sleep quality. That is your predictor predicting your mediator. And yes, it's significant. Great. Sleep quality predicting academic procrastination, meaning your mediator predicting in turn your dependent variable. Yes, significant. Great. And the last one is the problematic one, which is the same as the direct path we see here, and that is social media addiction predicting academic procrastination. And in this case, it is significant, meaning that there is no need for mediation. So this was the practical explanation for mediation, but again, worry not. Sometimes data may be not going in our way, but it's still fine. So keep in mind that the ideal scenario for this will be A, B, both significant, C, not significant. So this and this are ideal scenarios. And if this was to be respected, meaning that A and B, this one would be significant, whereas this other one, the C one, would not be significant, then it would be for mediation. And same thing for here. But again, unfortunately in this case we do not have it. Let's now look into another example of mediation, this time which will be significant. So now we have practice predicting exam grade with the mediation of self-regulation, because we would imagine that not only practice affects exam grade, but that practice might affect some other variable, in our case self-regulation, which in turn affects exam grade. So once again, we go to analysis, we go to medmod, mediation, and we put our variables in order. So we know exam grade is going to be a dependent variable, self-regulation the mediator, and practice the predictor. We already see better results, but let's not forget to check the boxes we need. We need labels, we need percent mediation, and path estimates. Now, this example here actually mimics the best case scenario. Why? Because the indirect path, A times B, is significant with a strong percent of mediation. But more importantly, the direct path, path C, is not significant, meaning that this is going to be a great example of mediation. Let's further check into the path estimates to see if even this table is as ideal as the first one, and we can see that the path A, meaning when practice the predictor predicts your mediator, that is self-regulation, is indeed significant. So wonderful. Path B instead, when self-regulation, your mediator, should predict your outcome, that is exam grade, then we see that once again is significant, which is also amazing in how we want it. And finally, you see that the last path, path C, which equates to the direct path here in the first table, is not significant, meaning that this is an example of full mediation. So, after we tackled mediation, let us now flip the coin to something different, that is moderation, that is the when or for whom. So in this case, moderation flips the question. It's not why something happens, but when or for whom it happens more or less. Say, for instance, adverse childhood event, which is measured through the ACEs, predicting violent behavior. But what if alcohol consumption amplifies that? So if this was the case, would mean that our independent variable is abuse, our dependent variable is violence, and our moderator would be alcohol consumptions. Now, what we need to do is to see at which level alcohol consumption will moderate the most the relationship between adverse childhood events and violent behavior, right? So let us suppose that our hypothesis is that adverse childhood experiences predict violent behavior the most among those with high level of alcohol consumption. So here we have quite a lot to unpack. So the first thing, we have the prediction, which should be simple enough, that is ACEs predicting violent behavior. So you will already know that your IV will be ACEs and your DV will be violent behavior. But what do we mean by the most among those with high level of alcohol consumption? What we mean here is that, first of all, this is a moderation because we're talking about levels, okay? So in this case, as you remember, it is that it is not why something happens, but when or for whom it happens more. So, okay, so we want to imagine that people with higher levels of alcohol consumption will have a stronger prediction of violent behavior stemming from their adverse childhood events. But enough yapping, let's see how to do this hands-on in Jamovi. Pun not intended, really. Anyway, we go to med mode, we click on moderation, and now half the job was already done, because already we said it before. We say ACEs being the predictor and violent behavior being the dependent and alcohol consumption being the moderator. Now, first table, we usually just report, okay? It's about the simple regressions and multiple regression, hierarchical regressions. Like, it's about the regressions of this model. But because again, as I mentioned, moderation is an instance of hierarchical regression. Anyway, what we care about here the most is the simple slope analysis, okay? So the table that will be outputted to us from Jamovi will be the main actor here, the main thing we need to look at and analyze or criticize, because why not? Numbers can be criticized as well. Anyway, so this table here is basically showing us that our moderator variable, alcohol consumption, is being stratified into three different categories: the average category, the low category, and the high category. The low category is comprised by those scores that are at least -1 standard deviation from the mean alcohol consumption score. The high category is the opposite. Those mean the opposite, figurative opposite. That is, those that scored at least 1 standard deviation above the mean alcohol consumption. And the rest, you ask? Well, the rest is the significance of each of the regressions which we run. So imagine metaphorically that in simple slope analysis we are running three different regressions: one for those that have low level of alcohol consumptions, one for those that have average level of alcohol consumption, and the third and final for those having high level of alcohol consumption. And then the rest is as usual. We check our p-values. As we can see from these p-values over here that are very, very, very good, we know that alcohol consumption is indeed a significant moderator in the relationship between ACEs and violent behavior. However, the hypothesis, it wasn't just a general one, that is a hypothesis just talking about moderation occurring. Our hypothesis was a specific one. In our hypothesis, we postulated that ACEs, or adverse childhood events, will predict violent behavior the most among those with high level of alcohol consumption. So having all significance wouldn't be enough. Okay? In this case, what we need is also the highest Z score, because these Z scores over here, they are symbolizing the strength of the prediction, meaning which of these is the best prediction, so for whom it happens the most, okay, among these three groups. So we care about the high level of alcohol consumption, and we see a Z of 4.44. However, from a very, very rapid glance, you will see that the highest is not the high level of alcohol consumption, but actually the average level of alcohol consumption. Which, fair enough, because if you are too drunk, probably you will not even be able to resort to your hands, because, yeah, you probably passed out somewhere on the floor. So, not really possible. Still possible. Anyway, not talking about that now, just talking about stats and what the numbers tell us. So, based on this table, because of the Z-scores and the fact that all of them are significant, we can say that adverse childhood events can predict violent behavior the most at the average level of alcohol consumption. Second most at the low level of alcohol consumption, and the worst, even though still can predict, which means that there still is a relation between the variables, but still the lowest of them in the high level of alcohol consumption. So let us have a brief summary. Let's clarify anything that is left to clarify. Mediation explains how. Moderator explains when. Mediation adds a path. Moderation adds an interaction between the variables. Mediation is about process. Moderation is about conditions. So, same IV and DV, different middle variables, one with an arrow going through a third variable, one with a third variable adjusting the slope. To summarize, Jamovi does both mediation and moderation with less pain than SPSS and fewer pop-ups than R. Less glory? Absolutely, but sometimes we can clean our behinds with glory and just be more practical, time efficient, and especially when we don't really care, but we just want to pass a class. Anyway, keep in mind, you gotta use the medmod module, which can be found from the modules over here, Jamovi library. You will search here medmod and you will install it. Then you feed in the dependent variable mediator, click, look at the paths A, B, C, and C after we control for the mediator. If A or B fails, stop interpreting, don't be a cargo called statistician. So this was for mediation. For moderation, as we just saw in this example, we just go to medmod, moderation, still feed the predictor, your outcome, and your moderator, and then we just click on estimates, and that's how we get our simple slope analysis, and we can interpret it P. And in case of having specific hypotheses, which inquire the most at which level, we check also the Z scores. In short, mediation, some sort of causal chain. Keep in mind, we're still talking about correlational methods, so still not really cause, but let's say some sort of chain in there. Moderation, more about contingency. Regression is the tool, the thinking is the hard part. That is, don't blindly add variables and cross your fingers. know the theory, draw the diagram, check the assumptions, and for the law of stats, don't say something mediates unless you've actually tested. Like, subscribe, and drop your worst med mod confusion in the comments, and see you next time.